It's a new season of Midnight Quilt Show, and to celebrate, I redecorated my quilting room. I hope you like it because I doubt it's ever going to be this clean again. I've got my decorations, I've hung up pictures of some of my favorite quilts, but here's the most exciting part. I have a new design wall. It's kind of like I'm a grown-up quilter. Too fun. This is actually the quilt that we're going to work on tonight, and it's the Thistle quilt, pattern designed by myself. We get friendly with 4 at a time flying geese and combine it with an interesting, easy to piece block. So let's get to it. Tonight, I'm going to redeem myself because I've actually designed this quilt pattern before, except last time I used half square triangles, which are easy to piece, but you have bulkier seams, making machine quilting a little more difficult. So I'm going to try it again using the flying geese. I'm also using these beautiful fabrics. You can tell it's a quilt I designed if there's only 3 colors. It's time to start chopping it up. Even though this thistle quilt has a lot of triangles, we're going to only cut squares, but we'll cut them in a bunch of different sizes. And the best part about this quilt, it's actually a free pattern. So check out the description box below to find out how to get it. So I have all the pieces that I need to make my flying geese. And I love that somebody was genius enough to figure this out. But basically I have my big square background and my smaller squares, and I'm gonna take a quick second and mark a line on these background squares. All right, now I'm gonna lay them right sides together with this background square. When I'm laying these on here, I wanna make sure that that drawn line makes one continuous line, because if it doesn't, I may know from experience what that looks like. It's not a flying geese block at all. And once I have that laid in place, I'm gonna give it a quick little pin to hold it so it doesn't slip, and then sew a 1/4 inch on each side of that drawn line. Okay, so I have the first part of my block, and I have to admit, I think this looks kind of fun how it dangles. It looks like a monster's mouth or something, but that's not what we need. So I'm gonna cut it directly on that drawn line. I'm gonna do the same thing with those remaining 2 pieces, laying them like so that line intersects those little triangles that we have now, like that. Beautiful. And I'm gonna sew a 1/4 inch on each side of those. So I have that finished now. All I have to do is cut on that line, and it should make 4 flying geese. And I have to say I'm excited to be trying this technique because the last time it didn't work so well. I used it for a block of the month, and you know, the quilters were saying, this is gonna be a lot better if we do flying geese. But I think it's just like anything in life, right? You have to try it a couple times before you get it right. Come apart. I probably should just cut that, but you know. All right, let's see how it looks. No, why did you do that? Well, that's not a redemption, that's a bad thing. Let's fix this. I'll be back in a second. Okay. I think I got it right this time. And the bad thing is, I haven't even had any of my piecing potion yet. That's the problem. All right, that's what they're supposed to look like. Here's what I did wrong. I should have pressed them open before I added the other square, but I was so excited about this new technique. Whatever, it's fixed now. Perfect, so I have 4 beautiful flying geese. I think my redemption of my redemption is starting to come together. But you know, sometimes you have to do things a couple times before they turn out perfect, like making pancakes or having children. I'm gonna press these open, trim them up, and we'll see how it kind of comes together to make part of our block. That didn't have to be that difficult, but they're finished. So now let's see how it comes together to make part of our thistle block. So this star block starts with a center star, but it also has partial stars around the outside, which we're gonna make right now using the flying geese blocks that are perfect in every way, shape, and form, but also including half square triangles. Now, if you're not sure how to put those together, it's in the pattern, very easy. All right, so we have our flying geese block. We're gonna use our rectangles right here. It's gonna get a couple of squares of the background fabric like so, and then we're gonna put our remaining half square triangles like this. And that gives us a partial star block. So I'm gonna sew these together because I need 4, and then we'll put the whole block together. So now that we have the 4 partial stars, I'm gonna get the rest of my pieces and show you what the rest of this block looks like. So now I've gathered all my pieces, I've laid out the block, and now you can get an idea of how we have our full star in the center and our partial star around the outside. And these are just another flying geese unit, except this time I made them correctly, ironing them down before I put the other star on there. If this were like a graded redemption, I feel like I'm like B-, teetering on a C+, but I'm gonna redeem myself, especially when I get to the quilting, because I have some new rulers that I'm gonna play with. So I have my pieces. I'm gonna assemble the center star first, and then put the rows together to make my finished block. This particular block is nice and big, nice and easy to piece. It has that center square, and then I just added the rows around it until I had my nice, big, beautiful block. So now that the star block is pieced, I'm loving how it's looking, of course, but there is a lot of points on it. So if you tend to chop some of yours off, just tell yourself it's supposed to be that way. It's gonna be fine. But I know myself, and I knew if I just made this block the only block in the quilt, I would not love so many points. So I'm gonna switch it up by alternating it with the courthouse steps block. It's kind of like little points, and then you get to this one, it's like a time to relax. As far as my redemption grade is going, I feel like I'm up to a solid B, maybe even a B+. And I think that deserves a subscribe. If you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do that because you never know what's gonna happen on the Midnight Quilt Show. Well, I have these 2 blocks finished. I'm gonna finish making more so you can see what the quilt looks like when it's all laid out. So laying out the blocks of this quilt is super easy. We're just gonna alternate between the star block and the courthouse steps. But here's what I'm loving about it. So this area, when those blocks come together, is gonna make a really cool effect. And I have some great ideas for the machine quilting. I cannot wait to get to that point. But first, I'm gonna sew this row together. So I have the first 2 rows done, and this is where you can see that secondary pattern starting to emerge. I have my blocks coming together, kind of looks like an Irish chain. It's really starting to frame that star. It's gonna look fantastic. So I'm gonna sew these rows together, assemble the rest of the top, and then we'll get to the machine quilting. So the quilt top is completed. I didn't add any borders to the pattern because they're not my favorite to piece, but you know what is my favorite? The machine quilting. So I'm gonna get this basted and get ready to quilt with some brand new rulers that just came out. So my quilt top is basted and ready to go, and I think for the machine quilting, I'm gonna have a little fun playing with rulers, but not just any rulers, my brand new rulers with creative grids. And I'm super excited about them. This is my second set of rulers, but that doesn't mean that it's a redemption. It's not a redo, it's like a sequel. The first set were awesome, but I'm gonna play around with the second set. So I have Chevy, Elvira, and Taj, and I think I'm gonna do a little bit of each of them in this quilt. So starting with Chevy, which is kind of hilarious to give it that name. It makes a chevron, which is where the name comes from, but I'm from a Ford family, like literally a Ford family. My in-law's name is Ford, my grandpa worked at Ford plant, my father-in-law works at Ford plant. It's a little awkward at family get-togethers, but it's fine. But I'm gonna use them to quilt nice, long, curvy lines, and I'll show you just how easy it is to do. So what I'm doing is quilting along the Chevy ruler. But as I approach the middle marking, I'm gonna stop and reposition the ruler to the next needle stop. Once I run into the edge of a block, I'm gonna travel along the edge and echo what I've just quilted. Now repositioning the ruler for echo lines is easy. I'm just gonna kind of eyeball it and keep those lines as close as possible. Now, as I approach areas that aren't quilted because the ruler kind of moves on past it, I'm gonna stop and use echoing to fill it in so I don't have any gaps behind the quilting. Now, I know I'm only quilting along half the ruler, but it's gonna give it a really cool stair-step effect. Okay, I still have a lot to do, but I was so excited to show you how it's turning out. Now, I'm using Chevy to quilt these curvy kind of lines in the background of the quilt. And this is not a regularly shaped background area. There's a lot of different shapes that I'm working with. So I still have this large unquilted area right here because the design kind of bypassed it. I'm gonna make sure I fill that in with more echo lines. I think people will notice a gap in the quilting before they notice an error, so I'm gonna make sure I quilt this thing in. But before I do that, I'm gonna grab Elvira and do some curvy lines to fill in the background areas of the quilt. So positioning Elvira along one of the edges of the blocks, I'm gonna quilt along the ruler till I reach the other end. Now that's not gonna give me a repeating curvy line, it's gonna give me a line with a point, which I think looks kind of fun. Now we're gonna switch up from the background just for a second, and I'm gonna use Taj to quilt a motif in the center of my teal blocks. So starting in the corners of one of my stars, I'm gonna position the Taj ruler so that I quilt along the outside of it, but I'm gonna rotate it so that I end somewhat towards the center of the block. Then repositioning the ruler to the other side of the foot, I'm gonna do the same thing, quilting a curved line that goes up to the opposite point, and then repositioning it again for the other side of the foot, coming back. Now the most important thing is that I end in the center of the block, somewhat near the center, and work my way around each point of the star, ending up exactly where I started. So using a matching thread will prevent any unintentional customizations of your quilting from showing up. Now I don't mind that those lines aren't all perfectly in the middle because ultimately when it's all done, we're not gonna notice it anyway. Well, that's about how I'm gonna quilt the whole quilt. So I'm gonna get back to work and I'll show you what it looks like when it's all done. So I'm thinking I'm gonna give myself an A+ in this quilt redemption, not because this quilt is perfect, but because it's finished. And a finished quilt is always better than a perfect quilt top. I love how the flying geese made it a lot easier to maneuver around those points, so that was definitely a win. And playing with all my new rulers was especially fun. I think the background designs really add a nice texture, and the motifs in the center block, well, they might not be perfect, but they sure do look good. Now don't forget, this is a free quilt pattern, so check out the description box so you can download it and leave me a comment letting you know what you think about my quilt redemption. And I'll see you next time on the Midnight Quilt Show.